Greetings everyone, it's IT2, and today I am officially on vacation till Thursday. I took a couple of days off this week to possibly deer hunt, possibly go to my mom and dad's. Probably won't play that many video games. I do want to read a lot of books though, and I got a lot of work to do around the house. Speaking of books, I just finished The Pariah by Anthony Ryan. I've still got quite a few books left for this year. Let's see what I'm missing so far. Waybound, the final book in the Cradle series. Empire of Silence, Howling Dark of the Sun Eater trilogy, or what's like 5-6 books. I was going to read Culture 1 and 2. I'm halfway through 1. Haven't started on 2. Probably won't get to that this year. Jim Butcher's 2 short story collections I need to read. The Magicians #1. I may just wait and read the whole trilogy next year. So I got 2 Blake Crouch's Recursion and Upgrade. I was planning on reading The Captain by Will Wright, The Shadow and Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne, Fairy Tale by Stephen King, Dark Half by Stephen King, Warbreaker, Elantris and Will of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson I didn't get to yet, Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter, Holly by Stephen King, which is out now, but I don't have it yet. Probably get it for Christmas. Ordinary Monsters by that Miro guy. I was going to read that for Halloween. I didn't get to it. It's a really big book. I was also going to read Neil Stephenson The Fall this year, but it was really big, so I don't know if I can get to these really huge books. And then the 2 more Odd Thomas books I'm missing. And then right now I'm reading Darker Shade of Magic by V. Schwab. So I don't know how many of these I can get to. This is the rest of November and December. I do want to read the rest of this one. This one was really good. I can't give it a 5. I could give it a 4.5. It makes you want to read the next book, but it's not what I was expecting. It's a little, I wouldn't say disjointed. It's just like kind of, it's weird. It's not what I heard about this book was that it's like twists and turns constantly. Like it's full of twists back and forth. You don't know what's going to happen or something like that. But that's not really what I experienced. For the longest time, I kept looking at the cover and thinking like, why is he called the Pariah? He's not a pariah. And why does it have him holding a sword? He doesn't have a sword. Because it starts out, he's a outlaw in an outlaw band by this guy who's a leader named Deccan Scarl. And he's kind of working his way up to like challenge the Duke in this duchy for, he's like an imposter sort of. He's not supposed to have the dukedom, or the king is maybe an imposter, something like that. He's supposed to have this money saved up somewhere too that's supposed to like help him finance it or whatever. Anyway, somebody betrays the outlaw band that they're a part of, and they all get killed except for him, this girl Toria that he leaves with, and just a handful of people. So it's kind of like Game of Thrones a little bit, how the Game of Thrones guy got his head cut off at the beginning of Game of Thrones. So it kind of relates to that. I think it did say for fans of George R.R. Martin somewhere on here because of it. Yeah, a rich treat for George R.R. Martin fans. So then he goes from being in this outlaw band, he goes to try to save somebody that was in his band, and he gets put in these the mines, to like mine for ore or something. So then this whole world is a really interesting world. It's based on this religion called the Covenant. It's called the Covenant of Steel trilogy. The second book is called The Martyr, and the third book is called The Traitor. So the martyrs are like basically saints in this religion, where really important people that influence the world, they die, they leave behind this legacy, or like they have a testament of like how you're supposed to live your life, sort of like a philosophy or something. And then they kind of sanctify them, and they have their bones or like any relics, like important things that they had during their life, and they kind of worship the people that died as martyrs. And they call the kind of God force or whatever of this religion the Seraphile, like seraphim angels. And then there's the bad force. I forgot what it's called. The mercantile? No, it's not mercantile. Doesn't matter really. Doesn't really get that much to word. It doesn't really explain if the religion is true or not, or if there's like magic in this world. There's kind of magic. There's not really magic. It's kind of like a couple of people that know the main character's fate. Like he has some kind of special. They can see his future, sort of. One of the characters is called the Sack Witch, and she keeps she keeps healing people for him and like charging him some stuff for it. Like the first time she heals his friend, he gets out of the pit mines with he gets out of the pit mines with Toria and this big guy and maybe somebody else, I can't remember. But then there's this nun kind of woman down there that started this whole religious group. What do you call that? A congregation. And she gave him, he becomes a scribe. So he spends like 2 or 3 years down here in these mines. He learns to read and write really good. And he has really good handwriting. Apparently, if you can read and write in this world, it's very rare and it's really important. And you can become like an important part. You can hang out with kings and queens and royals if you can just like read and write. And you have good handwriting. Because he keeps like getting all these jobs to like write stuff down. Alwyn Scribe is his name because he becomes a scribe at this point. So it's one of those kind of like Forrest Gumpy kind of stories, or like that Job one from Robert Heinlein, where it's like he goes from this situation to this situation to this situation, a little bit like King Killer, how he went from like with his parents to he went to like he's poor in this town of Rotterdam or whatever, then he went to the college, and then he goes on these other adventures. It's one of those kind of like a little disjointed because there's not really like a main plot really. Like, it starts out, he's trying to get revenge on whoever betrayed the outlaw band. And then he kind of gets to a point where he's like, he's doing more important things now. And, like, the outlaw band doesn't really matter. But then they show up again later, and they're like, oh, I bet you really want to kill me, huh? And he's like, nah, I don't really care. I was like, it doesn't really matter at that point. Like, I guess he does really care, but, like, I don't care at that point because it's like he's doing way more interesting stuff. Because, okay, so this girl, the woman that was, like, the nun, what was her name? Shirla. She dies in a cave-in while they're escaping. They had to dig this tunnel to get out of there. Out of the pit mines. And I think she was kind of like, knew she was going to die or kind of suicided herself so she could become a martyr. But he can't tell anybody that. So then, he has her testament and he like gives it to this priest in the next town over, and he starts like talking about how she's a martyr and like starting a religion kind of around her. Because every time they get a new martyr, it's like a weird... They don't want any new martyrs. The king doesn't or whatever. So, you kind of have to like force it on them. Kind of get everybody talking about it. So then he meets this other woman named Evadine Corlane. I think this is kind of like at the same time that his friend gets hurt. And he has to like have the Sack Witch heal his friend. And in return, she gives him a book that he has to translate. Because it's in this ancient runic language, which turns out to just be Vikings. I don't know why all these fantasy books they have to have the Northmen and they're always Vikings. Like the first Law books, they always had Vikings. There's always some group in every fantasy world that turns out to just be Vikings. They always have like braided hair and round shields and like the boats that can go in oceans or rivers, and it's like, I get it. You can't think of anything interesting and new. Whatever. So he's got this book that's written in this ancient Viking language. He has to translate as payment for her healing this thing. He's supposed to give her the book back to her later because she knew they would meet again because she's kind of like psychic or something to deal with him. Kind of weird. So then he meets Evadine Corlane, and she's like, she thinks she talks to God, or she's like a servant of God, or like really anointed leader of the armies for God or something like that, or for the Covenant, the Seraphile, whatever it's called. So he ends up kind of getting forced to join her army, even though he doesn't want to. And then he kind of starts training and getting good at like using an axe. That's why I'm like, why has he got a sword on the cover? He's using an axe. Later on, he gets a sword when he meets this guy that's a knight that was Evadine Corlane's childhood friend. So it's like he doesn't really have a relationship with Toria, the girl that he escaped with, or Shirla before she died, or Evadine Corlane. But he finds this girl when they end up going to the Viking land that is like a librarian, and he kind of like has sex with her. and then she kind of ended up betraying him. But she did translate that book for him, and what it turns out it was like she starts translating it, and she's reading her own words that she told him like the day before. So she's written like his life story, or that's what the book was. It was like his life story, and then there's like more pages. She's like, I don't want to translate anymore because then I'll be knowing the future. I don't know if I write the future down, would it be able to be changed? And it's all like freaking her out. So that's kind of makes you want to read the rest of the books, because you're like, what is going on here with this kind of fate thing with this one guy, and why does it work just for him? Oh, that's what it was, right? It's not about him. It's about they have all these other books of other people. They just needed somebody that they could know that this book is about this guy, so that they could translate that one and then figure out how to translate all the other ones, because then they could know the future of all these other important people in the world. Right? I don't know where all these other books are kept, but it's a pretty interesting concept. So other than that, like telling the future and like healing people, there's not really any magic per se. Yeah. So then he kind of keeps adding people to his party, kind of like an RPG, which is kind of interesting. With the one of them dies, and then he meets this knight guy, and then he kind of learns how to use a sword. And it kind of ended like in the middle of. It didn't really have an ending. It just kind of said to be concluded in the next book, and it just kind of goes on to the next book. But it's not a bad story. It's just not. It's not got that 5-star, like gold star material, like perfect book. It's just kind of. The beginning was a little slow to get into it, and then the ending didn't really kick, and it's kind of like. Kind of weird. It just kind of gives me like weird. Makes me want to read it. I hate reading it, but it's like I would enjoy it more, I think, if I knew. The whole thing about once you see those characters from the beginning of the book, like towards the end of the book, when he's like gone way off into other lands and come back and like had all these adventures, it's like, who gives a fuck about these guys? And there's always this like Lachlan's hoard, this treasure that he hears about. And he gets hints about it, and he keeps like he's getting that book translated, but he's also like, oh yeah, also I have this hoard of treasure I'm looking for, and do you know anything about that? He like keeps meaning to run away with Toria. Him and her are kind of like partners. Like they still want to be outlaws, and they don't want to be like fighting for the king and fighting these military battles where it's like the battle scenes especially are really good. But they're also gory, and they're kind of like causing him PTSD because he's having to like stick his axe into somebody's neck, and he's seeing people die in horrific ways. He doesn't want to be. He just wants to be an outlaw and like have some treasure and like go fuck off. But nobody will let him. He keeps getting pulled into these situations by the religion. So maybe there really is some kind of Seraphile influencing him or something. Pretty good book though, I gotta say.